Hello and welcome. My name is Vladislav Novikov. My guest today is Yuri Rashkin, host of YouTube channel RashkinReport and local elected official in the state of Wisconsin. Yuri, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's go to a recent Trump-Putin call. Many people thought it might be a turning point. What were your expectations, and are you satisfied with how it turned out?
Strangely enough, perhaps yes. Because, you see, my expectations were quite low. Because we see that all past efforts to end the bloodshed or bloodbath, as President Trump refers to it, has been unsuccessful. It's been a failure for President Trump in every time frame that he set out for himself to accomplish this in 24 hours, 100 days, before he was sworn in. You pick a time frame and it didn't work. So I knew that this was not going to work as well, primarily because Putin is not interested in negotiations or stopping the war. He wants to finish the war as, he wants to just finish what he started. And the fact that it is, President Trump has really not standing in his way much. If anything, we know that the pressure has been applied consistently to Ukraine, even to the point that this was verified by former Ambassador Brink, who is ambassador to Ukraine, who has just left her position, saying that all the pressure was being applied to Ukraine in this negotiation process, and none of it to Moscow. So in that vein, expecting much from this conversation, other than we know that Donald Trump is in a good mood whenever he speaks to Vladimir Putin, and hey, it's not the worst thing, I suppose, to have him in good mood. So we figured that Donald Trump is going to spend a couple of hours listening to lectures on Russian history and all sorts of things, as usually conversations with Putin apparently go. And what came out of this is that evidently Putin told Donald that he's not going to stop and that he should just walk away from Ukraine, which Donald joyfully is doing by explaining that this is a European affair. We've tried. This is just crazy. It almost seems like a kind of statement that Donald Trump has made when he would declare bankruptcy and he would walk away and he would show how smart he was to walk away now that this whole thing collapsed. He's smart to get out of the market. And so he's looking at these two warring sides and says, well, look at them. They only know what's important to them, what the details of negotiations are, and I'm just washing my hands here, which is where we were before Donald Trump said that he was going to have negotiations in the first place. So in a way, we've arrived at the same spot where we were, except that now United States is really no longer helping Ukraine because they decided to, I guess, walk away and surrender any leadership. But at the same time, I feel that for Ukraine to move forward, as in any divorce, it's important to go through with it all the way and to kind of complete the cycle and to start living separate, successful lives, which is the best kind of revenge. And what has been, and so in that position, seeing that Donald Trump is basically gave up on the idea of being a peacemaker here because, Vladimir Putin doesn't want to stop. So he walks away. That's kind of expected, good riddances kind of a thing, because it's been pretty obvious that the Trump administration has been slow walking, dragging its feet on everything that could put pressure on Vladimir Putin or help Ukraine, whether it's European sanctions, whether it's arms sales, whether it's aid packages, anything, which of course is, would be hard to expect considering that Elon Musk and his Doge team started by gutting USAID. So I think it was pretty clear what direction they're going. But still, I think people were shocked, and me to a certain extent as well. Really interestingly enough, I had a conversation with ChatGPT about it. ChatGPT was shocked about this as well, because I put the comments, that word cloud that was produced by President Trump after speaking with Vladimir Putin, and I put that word cloud in ChatGPT, and I said, what do you think? What does this sound like to you? The ChatGPT was like, wow, United States is capitulating. And I thought, well, it's interesting that this bunch of metal can say things that politicians are not daring to say. But it's probably because ChatGPT is not running for re-election, doesn't really care what the outcome, it just states things as it analyzes the information. And the word cloud from President's Twitter qualified as such. Now, of course, artificial intelligence is, can make things up and so on. But I think it's pretty clear that through his statements, through his comments, through his behavior, Donald Trump is showing himself to be Putin's man. And that's not America's man. I think that the fact that if we look at a little broader situation than what's happening with Ukraine, and you see that Donald Trump, President Trump right now is attacking pop stars in the United States who dared to support Kamala Harris, from Taylor Swift to Bruce Springsteen, those kinds of things. You see that his approach is, and of course this is due to what? More than likely that he was spurned by any decent performer for his own parade that he's planning to have on June 14th. Clearly, he can't find an A-lister to sing, to perform, and maybe Kid Rock just isn't cutting it anymore. I don't know. But I think that Kid Rock, and then there's a couple of other people that Donald Trump can rely on, and Vladimir Putin. Perhaps Shaman, an infamous Russian performer, will make his appearance at June 14th to kind of as a gesture of goodwill. Vladimir Putin will send his, of course, we haven't seen him in a while, but he had a couple of really hot singles that maybe Vladimir Putin would send him to Donald Trump as a gift for June 14th to perform. Who knows? But in this situation, this phone call, it just made everything. I think we finally reached the point where things are crystal clear. And at this point, it doesn't mean that people won't close their eyes. People can still close their eyes and can say, you know what? I think that we need to really, really make sure. And I'm seeing Republican senators do that because there's 70, 80 votes right now to put much harsher sanctions on Russia, if only President Trump chose to go that route. And so until then, we have senators who are saying that, yes, this can happen. We have the tools. It would be only nice if President Trump would show some leadership and pull himself away. And I'm speaking for myself here, just pull himself away from Russia, kind of rise up. From that level of low that he has reached by reaching down to Vladimir Putin. I think it's been very clear ever since Helsinki, where Putin and Trump met, that Putin and Trump meeting is not a good thing for anybody. And even Donald Trump didn't look very happy after the meeting. He kind of looked very beaten down. So, considering that Trump's goal was what? To set up a meeting with Putin. And Putin said, there won't be any meeting. And so Trump said, okay, then I guess I'm not helping Ukraine anymore. And Putin was like, well, okay. And so that's one possibility. Basically the meeting and help to Ukraine were tied in, and Putin doesn't want to end the war and perhaps doesn't want to see Donald Trump quite yet. And so Donald Trump thought that he could be seen by Putin, with Putin, officially in daylight, so to say, if he only got Ukraine to capitulate, to surrender. But it's not working out. And so he's going to have to wait and find a different way and to persuade Vladimir Putin to spend more time with him and possibly to see him in person publicly.
I wonder what DeepSeek would say about this all. And building on that, was this conversation a conversation a step toward ending the war, or just more time for Putin to regroup?
Both, because this was a step trying to, as far as Donald Trump sees it, to end the war. And from Putin's point of view, he might barely maybe need time to regroup. But at the same time, we see there's already evidence, there's satellite imagery that Russian troops are building reinforcements and doing some kind of defensive posturing on the border with Finland. So I think that Putin and peace are not two things that are going to go together, even though they kind of start with the same letter. But that's just not going to happen, because Russia is interested in being a warring nation right now. They don't really have a desire to stop. Things are working well. And their greatest supplier, China, essentially is interested in Russia continuing to engage in war, continue to weaken itself. This is working out for China, and Donald Trump is not going to be an obstacle in the way of Russian troops. So the only thing that is stopping all of these plans from coming together is Ukraine and Ukraine's armed forces, which is why it is so important to support them now more than ever, even considering, especially considering that as taxpayers, we're no longer doing it through our government. So as Americans, we have a greater opportunity to participate individually in supporting Ukraine now, because it is kind of like our reputation as a country that's at stake here. These kinds of maneuvers that we see where President of the United States is trying to improve either his personal standing or his business standing or his family's finances with different things that are being justified to us as things that are being done for the benefit of the United States, sends a really, really distressing message. You know, when we see President of the United States accepting a free plane from Qatar, it sends a troubling message. But then when we find out that actually this was not a free plane, that President Trump was really unhappy with the fact that he was going to get an old used plane and he wasn't going to get a newer plane until years from now. And so White House staff through Pentagon apparently reached out to Qatar to arrange for this plane. And then, you know, it's usual Trump. He tells a pretty story. Hey, you know, they gave me a free plane. What am I going to say? No. And but it actually was a transaction that was initiated by the White House. So all of these things that may seem like on the state level are really just, you know, just personal affairs that President of the United States considers to be acceptable behavior right now. In this vein, I think it helps to understand his communication with Putin, his vision of what his relationship with Putin would be good for. And it's certainly not about Ukraine, because the only thing that Donald Trump talks about Ukraine is, oh, let's stop the carnage, let's stop the bloodbath, you know, those things. Really, the only point of which those statements, to be honest, is to remind Putin that his cannon fodder is running out. And so really this is a message to Vladimir that, Vladimir, you have some limited strengths. Your cannon fodder is, you know, dying, is running out. To which Putin just says, you know, I'll get some more from China or from North Korea. And that's the conversation. This is not about the fact that Russia continues to attack peaceful populations in Ukraine, hitting just civilian centers. That's not what this is about. This is about negotiating a better deal for the president, for his family. And I think just being sober about it and sober-minded and seeing things for what they are doesn't mean that things are going to work out poorly. But I think until we realize where we are, it's hard to move in the right direction.
President Zelensky made Ukraine's position clear. He said Ukraine won't withdraw from its territory or accept Russia ultimatums. He also said that if Russia proposes a memorandum, Ukraine will offer its own version. Now we already had one memorandum. It's having a good idea, or does Ukraine simply have no choice?
A little from column A, a little from column B, because yes, I think Ukraine has very good history, or not very, I'm sorry, very poor history with memorandums. The Budapest Memorandum, I think, is what we're all referring to here. So for those paying attention at home, that's what we're talking about. But I think that I kind of get the feeling that from Ukrainian point of view, that kind of decreases the value of any agreement signed with the United States. And I think in court, it is routinely allowed to argue that a certain agreement plea was made if it was made under duress, then it's not really so valid. And I think that Ukraine is making this deal right now that it made about rare earth minerals and all those things clearly under duress. So I think that to shoot down the road, this would need to be reviewed, relooked. I think that there would be ways to explain why this is really not the kind of agreement that needs to be enforced, can be enforced. And by the way, where's the American president? Oh, he's in Rostov, run away. And that would be an interesting conclusion to this. But at the same time, United States, as long as we don't start sending armaments to Russia, really requires Ukraine to be on good terms and do everything it can to be on good terms with every country in the world that is not actively, fighting it. So, I don't think there should be any goodwill towards Russia or Russians or any of that direction. But at the same time, as long as the United States is merely, not helping and joining the list of other countries that are not, well, I don't know who is there that's not doing anything to help Ukraine. So there you go. That's a depressing list. Still, I think that relations with the United States are crucially important, and it is not clear to what extent that position is viewed in Kiev, which I know may seem strange because, isn't President Zelensky chasing President Putin and President Trump all over the world, like in some kind of a, where in the world is Carmen Sandiego, let's find Putin. Oh, he emerged out of a 7-Eleven in Las Vegas, let's send Zelensky there. Even with all of that in mind, we see that there's no, Ukraine and Zelensky still has to operate and agree to terms, negotiations, and agreements with the United States. It's just the world that Ukraine finds itself in, even though it has to actively now explore all sorts of other relations because the United States, with this administration, even the rare earth minerals deal is not proving itself to be absolutely no use in helping Ukraine provide for its security today, tomorrow, in the near future, in the immediate future. One of the challenges and criticisms against the Biden administration was that they were not providing enough weapons that Ukraine might need, but the mindset of the Trump, Biden's White House and Pentagon was to provide weapons for Ukraine that Ukraine needs right now. So thinking about today is important, and Ukraine is once again in that situation. Although it's good to hear that in Germany they're planning on building more rockets. The 300-kilometer ATACMS are going to be built. Lockheed Martin is planning on building them in Germany. So more power to them. I think that's a very important sign of the times is that more and more weapons are going to be manufactured outside of the United States, and the United States is going to become less and less relevant because when we are not participating, when we walk away, when we surrender, we don't look strong, and we're not going to be respected. And then we're going to be speaking about how President of Ukraine has a strong position while the President of the United States is retreating. That's not the way it should be. As an American, I find it very bothersome and troubling.
And let's talk about Europe's reaction. Do you think the EU is ready to stand up to Putin and support Ukraine, or are they still waiting to see what Trump says first?
I think that the reason that we found ourselves in this negotiation, whatever that was, is because European leaders, the four musketeers, together with Zelensky there, announced that gave essentially an ultimatum to Russia. And they wanted United States blessing on it. And the blessing turned into this negotiation thing. It's pretty clear that Europe is very serious about its intentions to levy sanctions and to provide more pressure on Russia. That is admirable. That is encourageable. This is great. Fantastic. Now what? Now action. Well, Europe doesn't seem to want to do this without blessing of the United States. The United States is being a delay machine right now. Okay, so then what happens next? That's when we are trying to figure out at what point, and we're only going to know this afterwards when we pass the point. When is that point when the world is going to actively start helping Ukraine without the United States, regardless of what the United States is going to do? Because in the end, Europe has to help Ukraine. I think when there's all sorts of Trump apologists who are saying, we're saying, I think they hopefully stopped saying it now, that, Donald Trump has no choice but to help Ukraine. Yeah, whatever. I think that another fake story that shown itself to be fake because Donald Trump is not Santa Claus, but Europe has to continue helping Ukraine, and I think we see all the signs of it: increased weapons manufacturing, sanctions that are being discussed and moved forward with. And I think it's important to understand that even though Great Britain and Brexit. It took a while, but they left in the end. Everybody made jokes about how Great Britain was leaving for a long time, but then they left. Now they're trying to figure out how to get back in. But I think that there's a pattern there in the sense that democracies are moving too slow, but when they are moving, they're hard to stop. They accept that elections. So I think that Europe right now is demonstrating that it is willing to stand up to Trumpism and to Putinism. And I think Romania has just given us some very, very encouraging news by having somebody who is a pro-democracy candidate win. And then become the next elected the next president of Romania, which I think is an important sign because we're living in the world of news, and one of the things that these people that we're dealing with by Trump and Putin is trying to create a feeling of uncertainty when we're never certain of what's going to happen. They benefit from this. They need us not to feel certain about things, and so when we have things that are going our way, and by our, I mean civilization, Western civilization, whatever, enlightenment, whatever, then that does send a signal to others. It shows that we are going in the right direction, and the next elections that are going to be happening in Europe, I think there's a feeling of wind at our back, and of course there's going to be all sorts of challenges on the way of every democracy, and Russia is always going to be right there helping cause trouble, but as we see in Romania, there's a way forward, and I think this Trump and this Putin disease that we're dealing with, this too shall pass.
Mm-hmm. And here is something unexpected from Zelensky. He proposed a free trade zone between Ukraine and the US. Do you think Trump would agree to that?
I think that to be really, if we're going to be taking this as far as, to its natural conclusion, Ukraine should just apply to be United States 51st state. Because we see that President Trump is not really interested in defending allies. And so perhaps he would be interested in defending our own territory, although we're just hearing about tornadoes that are hitting Missouri, St. Louis area, and their federal government is nowhere to be seen. So can't even count on protection in case of natural disaster. So I'm not even sure there's a value to being a 51st state of the United States. And also when we talk about free trade zones, let's not forget that which country did not get any tariffs laid upon it during the Liberation Day? Russia. Russia got no, also North Korea, but Russia got no tariffs. But so I think it's Ukraine that is in the middle of a war from Russia, defending itself against Russia, and at the same time being levied with, what, a 10% tariff, I think is very justifiable. And it's saying, at least can we please have the 10% of the tax removed and have a free zone to trade with the United States. Why not? But I think there's also kind of a bigger opportunity that was, I feel, lost, and that is during the time that Biden was in office, was a very important time to build the ties, to develop that, to develop more of those trade opportunities, not now, but over the last several years. Simply because we have provided so much help and aid to Ukraine. We made such an impact as Americans, and at the same time, we have so little familiarity with Ukraine. So few Americans have been in Ukraine, have done business with Ukraine, anything like that. So I think that building these trade bridges is an important part of making sure that we have bipartisan support for Ukraine, not just because we have politicians who understand understand, not just because few people who are hosting Ukrainians and they understand, but just to have this, mass bridge of travel communication between the two countries would have been really nice right now, I think, in terms of providing needed support and just among the general population. Although, of course, Americans that are paying attention to the news are seeing what's going on and are seeing that Ukraine is being attacked not just by Russia, but also being betrayed by the American administration. And that is very noticeable, but only to those people that are paying attention in the first place.
Thank you so much, Yuri. Really appreciate your time and insight. Great having you with us.
My pleasure.